fellow Janeites. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a review of the new Netflix Persuasion when I watched it, but it's been a few days and I just have too many thoughts to not share. So, without further ado, let's get on to the review. It wouldn't really be an adaptation review if I didn't talk about how they interpreted the heroine, Miss Anne Elliot. If you're looking for a book similar Anne, this adaptation is not where you will find it. At all. The Anne here is one of the ones with the most inaccurate costumes. She is loud, boisterous, says the wrong thing at the wrong time, is socially inept, a direct opposite to her book form, and is also kind of a bit of a drunk in this adaptation. So yeah, not book Anne. I think that it's probably has to do with it being kind of a self-insert. A lot of people who like Persuasion, and we know that the director has said that it's her favorite Austen novel, they like it because they read it when they were going through a breakup, and then they kind of projected onto Anne. And so that's kind of what this Anne feels like. She acts and makes decisions like a modern woman would, in some cases, which doesn't really fit in the Regency position and setting of the film. So it's quite possible it's self-insert. That's what it feels like. And yeah, not an accurate Anne. There isn't really anything glaringly wrong with their Captain Wentworth. It's just not a particularly inspiring interpretation of him. He kind of looks like a drowned puppy for the entire film. And the sort of drowned, lost puppy is good when you're in Bath, and that is kind of what Captain Wentworth is in Bath a bit. But at Uppercross, we're supposed to see him being smooth and charming, and he's trying to impress on Anne how over her she is. And look at how cool I am now. Which doesn't really come across in this adaptation. He's just kind of sad and mopey. Yeah. Not a very inspiring Frederick. Although his costumes are decent. Alright, another character that they change is Louisa Musgrove. And they do it in a bit of an odd way. They have her try to set up Anne and Frederick at first, but then she decides that she likes Frederick, and then she asks Anne for her blessing first, and she perceives that there seems to be something there, and I don't know, it's just weird and kind of unnecessary. Like, Louisa, she's not like Harriet Smith level of intelligence, but she's not that smart or that perceptive in the book. No offense to Louisa, she's a perfectly fine character. She's young and naive and sheltered. And you still kind of get that in this adaptation, but she's also, I don't know, Louisa doesn't need to perceive things early on. It just makes her motivation seem weird. If she notices something going on between Anne and Frederick, then why does she then decide that she wants to pursue him? Like, seriously. If you think he likes Anne, and Anne likes him back, don't be like, oh, they're being awkward and not talking to each other, so I guess it's okay. I don't know, it's nice to see Louisa be given some attention, but also you didn't have to take it in that direction. It's just weird. Alright, Lady Russel time. They make her into a much more sympathetic, motherly character, which is not a terrible choice. It's just Lady Russel is supposed to be basically Anne, but if Anne had class consciousness, in a way. If Anne put value on rank, she would be like Lady Russel. But this Lady Russel doesn't really, and it's like, it's not the worst change they made. I still kind of wish they hadn't made the change to Lady Russel, but with the other changes they made, it works. Certainly worse things they did, as you will soon see. Okay, I know I have been looking a lot at the negatives, but I've got like a handful of positives, a small handful, but it's something. Starting with Mary. Mary Musgrove, or Mary Elliot, depending on if you're thinking of her before or after her marriage. I like what they did with her. I suspected I would from the trailer. They make her a little bit self-conscious, but the way they did it works and feels genuine and like a person. She feels like Anne's little baby sister who's somewhat spoiled, rather than a young Mrs. Bennet, essentially. I like Mary. They did her good. Another character that I liked what they did with was Mr. Elliot. They didn't really change much from book Mr. Elliot, but they did make some changes to the plot surrounding him. So they have Mr. Elliot come right out and say that the reason he wants to discourage Sir Walter becoming closer with Mrs. Clay is so that he can keep his inheritance. He says that right out to Anne, which works with the other stuff they did with his storyline. They essentially cut Mrs. Smith, Anne's friend who was wronged by Mr. Elliot, out from the story, which means that you kind of do need Mr. Elliot to say what his motivations are, because we don't have Mrs. Smith to tell us. So they made that decision because of that, and just in terms of character and the way they portray him, it's quite accurate. The very charming Mr. Elliot, which is just as Mr. Elliot needs to be. An interesting choice they made with the plot was to have Anne and Frederick almost tell each other their feelings, but then not. And I think they did it to try to build up tension and like make you want to scream, just talk to each other already. But instead it makes you want to scream, you started talking to each other. Why did you stop? Like, Frederick asks Anne. Anne says, I don't want you to be angry. Frederick asks Anne, well then what do you want me to be? End of the conversation. Like, they could have ended their whole estrangement there very easily. with 2 words from Anne. Or actually 1 word. Not that hard. And then later, in their conversation by the beach, I don't understand why Frederick hesitates and then switches to asking if they can be friends. I feel like that conversation, it would have worked better in the carriage ride to go break the news of Louisa's fall to the Musgroves. Because it feels like Frederick wants to say more, but there's something holding him back. Frederick is a very determined character in the book. Once he has his course set, he sails through. So his hesitation there is a bit off, whereas if you put it after Louisa's fall, at this point he thinks that he's going to be potentially forced to marry Louisa. So it would make sense why he stopped short. He wants to tell Anne how much he still admires her, but if he's already basically engaged to someone else, he kind of has to stop himself short. It would work so much better if they moved it there. But no, we needed Anne barefoot on the beach to then run into the water to go swimming. Okay, I need to talk about the letter. You all know what letter I'm talking about if you've read the book. Captain Wentworth's letter in the book is one of the most beautiful love letters ever written. And this movie, it kind of changes the letter. I first noticed it when they jumped a whole 3 lines of the letter, and I kind of started freaking out, so I had to watch the clip again to see exactly how they changed it. But basically, they updated some of the language. They had Frederick explicitly state that he knows Anne is going to be marrying Mr. Elliot, rather than the more quietly implied of the book. And also, they cut out the subtleness. Like, when Frederick in the original letter talks about how Anne must have seen through his feelings, and must have perceived his reasons for being in Bath, whereas the edited letter in the adaptation says, "You can't have seen my feelings because you don't love me anymore." And Frederick, you're supposed to be half agony, half hope. You need both in the letter. This is just kind of like, okay, Captain Wentworth's letter is perfect in the book. Why did you have to change it? So, there was also featured in the trailer some updated modern words, as well as in several shots released earlier on. Things like, now we're worse than exes, we're friends. If you're a 5, it said that if you're a 5 in London, you're a 10 in Bath. Which, okay, if she wanted to do a modern persuasion, you can do a modern persuasion. We already have one. We could do with 2. The one we have is not the best, so another one, you know, it could have been good. But no, we're in Regency era with rapidly flip-flopping between more period drama original text and things like empath being thrown around and cappuccino. Like, if they wanted to do a modern persuasion, they could do one, but the modern words in the period persuasion just, it pulled me out of the story every time it happened. I would start to get a little bit settled in, and then that felt out of place. Then I'd start to get a little bit settled into it, and there was a random modern slang term. I feel like the movie would have worked so much better if there just wasn't the random modern words. It doesn't work at all for me. No. Okay, so I know there was a lot of concern after the trailer came out about the breaking of the fourth wall. I naively hoped when I watched the trailer that it was just something added to the trailer, but no, it's there, and it's everywhere. It felt alright in the beginning. The beginning of Persuasion, the book, does have a good bit of exposition, where it's just introducing you to the characters and the situation and the backstory, and just catching you up to speed so that you can understand what's happening. Which means that narration at the beginning can work. Because, you know, the adaptation can't spend 3 chapters explaining. They gotta get the story moving. So it worked there. Further on, it had its moments where it was kind of funny. But there were other parts, especially at the very end, where it just felt weird. It broke you out of the story. It's like you're watching it and getting into the world, and then, oh, now Anne's in your world, and is she? Was she ever in Regency era, this Anne? Who knows? There are parts of it where it works, but there are parts where it feels unnatural and clumpy, and like it breaks up the story, and I could do with a little less narration further on. Alright, final outtakes, and then I'll let you go. So, the adaptation of a whole felt a little bit like they wanted to do a modern Persuasion, but didn't because that's already been done recently, which overall gives it a sort of mashed up, cut together. It feels like you took a Regency Persuasion and a modern Persuasion, cut out bits from both, and pasted them together, which makes the flow a little awkward. Overall, I would rate the vibe as being like Jane Austen fan fiction. So set in the Regency, but with more modern elements added. So if you approach it knowing what to expect, or if you just pretend it's not Persuasion, it's a fairly decent movie. Not a sparkling period romance, but you know, it's a good movie. It's not a good adaptation of Persuasion. Well, that about sums it up. Until next time, run mad as often as you choose, but do not faint.